of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you again for hour 2 of our live broadcast, coming to you on FM, AM, on our website, aneighborschoice.com. That's weekdays 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're live. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're going to have a great weekend as we head towards it. And joining me now is someone who's always making waves in his consistent analysis of foreign affairs, foreign policy, and the effects of empire around the world. We have with us Scott Horton. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you again, my friend.
Yeah, it's great having you on. And I wanted to have you on because there's all this noise this way and that way about the Nord Stream pipeline. And a lot of folks I've talked to Sir Owen Whitman, geopolitical analyst, Colonel McGregor yesterday, and I wanted to get to you too because there's a lot of noise and confusion around Nord Stream, but from the folks that I appreciate and trust, they see this as a big moment in the realignment of the geopolitical world that we have. This is a big moment. Hasn't been a moment like this perhaps since World War II. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I don't know about the destruction of the pipeline itself being,
not the pipeline itself, but just that where we're headed, the whole moment of the Ukraine conflict. Yes.
Oh, sure. Yes. I mean, it's indicative of, the entire consensus in America now, which is to drive Europe out of Russia, and we don't want a cooperative relationship with them anymore at all. We want them to go to hell, I guess, go east, stay out. And, their biggest priority has been to separate Russia from Germany. In fact, I just saw a speech from 2015 by George Friedman, the head of Stratfor, who says, listen, this is what America has fought for the last 100 years, is to prevent an alliance between Germany and Russia, because that is the only force in the world that could ever threaten the United States, which is, of course, nonsense. How is Germany and Russia threaten the United States, even if they're combined? But in other words, that is an alliance between the two, represents a hegemony that would be able to, at the very least, ignore the United States. After all, why does Germany need us if they're better and better friends with the Russians all the time? That's why we're there, is to protect them from the Russians. That's the whole purpose of NATO, to keep America in, the Germans down, and the Russians out. That's what the British said back, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. So I think a big part of the reason that America helped to provoke the war in Ukraine in the first place was because they knew that's would be what it took to get the Germans to finally give up on the Nord Stream pipeline deal with the Russians and to turn instead to Texas natural gas suppliers and so forth. And to prevent that, from a libertarian perspective, what's a peace pipeline, right? The more integrated Germany and Russia are, the less likely they are to fight. And as we all remember, the last 2 times Russia and Germany fought, it was the worst thing that ever happened. We're supposed to fear an alliance between Russia and Germany? I fear war between Russia and Germany far more than that. And, this is all Bill Clinton's fault. I know people picture America, they picture the bird's eye view of the map of our great country, they picture red, white, and blue, and the flag, and their mama, and baseball, and all these things. But America's foreign policy is Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, and John McCain making decisions. Okay? Should not be too hard of a stretch to see how these men have botched everything. Throw in Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland. These people have ruined everything. It's their fault that they have brought us to, frankly, the brink of nuclear war. And then as far as the pipeline, I have to tell you, I don't have specialized in-depth knowledge about all the latest accusations about who must have done it and all the different clues. I can only tell you my overall impression is America and or maybe the Poles are the ones with the incentive to do it. the Russians have no incentive to do it. They can just turn it off. They don't have to blow it up. And it would be, a strike. I think until proven otherwise, I presume the Americans did it to let the Germans know that you're not going back to that. We told you before, and you pushed it, and now it's come to this, and now let this be a lesson to you. You're not going back to Russian natural gas, which is just, I have to tell you, Dave, this whole thing is the most reckless policy since World War II. It is just absolutely insane and unconscionable, and it's frankly to me unbelievable that the American people have any other priority in the world now other than all at once screaming in unison at Joe Biden that he better negotiate a ceasefire in this Ukraine war right now. How can any of us care about any other thing than this? Okay, Yemen. But other than that, I mean, they are truly risking all of our lives and the future of human civilization on this planet.
Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, you posted on antiwar.com a post about Jeffrey Sachs, who's been in the news for his interview with Bloomberg, where they were freaking out because he said that perhaps America or somebody connected to America destroyed the pipeline. But you say that the whole, this is Eric Garris's post on antiwar.com, the whole interview is worth watching, that he suggests we are on a path of escalation to nuclear war, nothing less. Mm-hmm. It's hard for people to register that. It's like, Scott, people have heard, especially like in earlier periods of time during the Cold War, nuclear wars everywhere around the corner, and it becomes like Chicken Little. You say the sky's falling, and then people don't believe it anymore, or cry wolf or whatever. Uh-huh. How do people register the severity of what's going on? Because folks in talk radio, they may be familiar. A lot of the people who are most likely to oppose war, which is this new right, it's not permeating Congress. Most of the congressional people in the House and so forth, Republicans and so forth, they think they have to keep going along with arming to the teeth the Ukrainians. I guess they just don't believe their own rhetoric that it is fake news, right? Yeah, they don't believe in fake news. They say that the news outlets are fake news, but they really don't believe it when it comes to war.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that funny? Listen, I'm so glad you brought it up in that context. I mean, what we need to see is a massive civil war within the Republican Party now. Is the GOP America first, or are they still George W. Bush? Remember, John McCain and Mitt Romney went down in humiliating defeat because they would not divorce themselves from W. Bush's legacy. Donald Trump took W. Bush's legacy and beat Jeb Bush over the head with it until they were both disgraced, done permanently, we thought. And so, I mean, this is absolutely, there should be lines drawn and major fights going on inside the Republican Party about whether we're hawks on Russia or whether we ain't. Well, I shouldn't say we, whether they are hawks or whether they ain't. And it just makes no sense to me. It's the perfect thing to fight Biden on. You want to fight Biden for being too weak on Russia, not doing enough to risk thermonuclear holocaust? That's stupid. The danger of Joe Biden is his recklessness on this. Like somehow it was decreed from the top of some mountain by some demigod that the Republican narrative must always be that Democratic weakness and femininity endangers us. No, that's wrong. Was it Bill Clinton's weakness and femininity that burned all the Branch Davidians to death? Was it Barack Obama's weakness and femininity that lied us into war, in tripling the war in Afghanistan, lied us into war in Libya, supported bin Laden's suicide bomber brigades in Syria, overthrew the government of Ukraine? Or that is recklessness, American imperialism intervening where we do not belong. You can be tough and macho and have a ton of upper body strength and a big old truck and still be smart and know better than to think that America ought to be intervening in these wars like this. And after all, how could it be if you find yourself in agreement with Joe Biden? Well, I think he's doing the right thing here. Maybe even a little bit more like that. Come on, does that really sound right? Couldn't possibly. And look at how dangerous this policy has been, And
the there's a lot of weasels that used the cover of Trump's America First not being very specific policies, to basically say, yeah, I agree with Trump. We shouldn't have endless wars, but we should, do a proxy war and arm to the teeth the Western Ukrainian government. And it's shame on them because they say they're pro-life.
With China and Venezuela and everybody else. Hey, America first. That means I guess we do whatever we want. It's still the George W. Bush's Republican Party after all.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks have not really understood what that actually means if we're going to actually continue down that road.
And now, David, I'm sorry, because you did ask me about why should people believe that there's a real danger of nuclear war here? That's a great question. Look, the Soviet Union is dead and gone 30 years. Global communism is gone. Remember in Terminator 2, the kid asked Arnold Schwarzenegger, what do you mean a nuclear war with Russia? I thought we were friends with them now. They had to fix the narrative of the Terminator franchise because how's Skynet supposed to get us into a war with Russia if we're still friends? And the Terminator say, well, the Russians still have a lot of nukes, so Skynet figured they could still start the war anyway. But it kind of took the oomph out of the whole story that there was no more USSR by the time the sequel hit the theater. I know I'm an old man revealing myself here, but still. So look, it should be completely stupid that I would sit here and tell you that there's a danger of nuclear war between us and Russia. What could we possibly have as outstanding issues between our nation and theirs that would lead to danger of conflict, much less thermonuclear Armageddon type conflict? Well, those are Joe Biden's words yesterday. We're in the greatest danger of Armageddon that we've been in since 1962. That's what the president said. And he's right about that. And essentially the syllogism goes like this. Vladimir Putin has bitten off apparently quite a bit more than he could chew in the Ukraine war. And then he's taken a bad hand and he's doubled down rhetorically. He's now not taken the entire east of the country. He's just claimed to have taken it and claimed to have annexed it. And I don't mean the entire east, everything east of the Dnieper River, but in the southeast, 4 provinces, not just the Donbass, that's Donetsk and Luhansk, but also now Zaporozhye and Kherson as well, all the way to the west of the northwest of Crimea. And he's saying this is all Russia now. He's already signed the papers and everything. That this is, he claims now, not Ukrainian territory that's being fought for, but he's essentially claiming he's already won it. And yet he hasn't. And now, so either he has to send in a massive conventional force that's just being conscripted and trained up now to occupy those areas and make that permanently true, that we're going back to 1783 lines here, or he's going to have to start using atomic weapons in order to force the other side to just quit. And the American intelligence officials keep telling the papers that they believe, and Putin and his men have continued to threaten, that this could come down to the Russians using nukes. What they're saying in a way there, David, is they're admitting that this war is everything to the Russians. The Biden administration, this, as I said, this is all about breaking off Russia from Germany. They don't care about Ukraine. This is all about selling weapons. They don't care about Ukraine. But to the Russians, they admit between the lines, this means everything to the Russians to the degree that they would even use, presumably at first at least, low-yield atomic bombs, so-called tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine to try to bring an end to the war. And now I'm sure we're up near a commercial break here soon, so let me just wrap here by saying
you've got about 10 more minutes or so.
Oh, great. So David Petraeus, the worst American general since McClellan, I have to say, or most incompetent, went on this week on Sunday morning. And he said, presumably with authority granted to him to speak for the Biden government on this, he said, if the Russians use a tactical nuke in Ukraine, America will destroy their entire conventional army in Ukraine and we will sink their Black Sea fleet. Now, I mean, anyone listening to this ought to be asking the obvious question. If that's what we do after they've already crossed the line and started using atomic bombs, what do we think they're going to do when we destroy their entire conventional military and including sink their Black Sea fleet. And presumably that means obliterate their naval base at Sevastopol as well. Well, that'll mean the loss of your hometown and mine. Oh, you live in Tampa Bay. You're on the list, pal. I live between the capital of Texas and the biggest military base in America, Fort Hood. And I got San Antonio, another 100 miles south of Austin. Okay? We're dead in this thing.
What does that mean? Explain that for people. What does a nuclear strike? And because people just think, well, if Russia shot one, America could shoot it or blow it up or something. It wouldn't come near us. What does that? No. Tell me the facts as we know them, for what we know.
America cannot shoot down an incoming volley of nuclear missiles from Russia. Their best Aegis radar anti-missile missile systems are meant to intercept one or two rockets launched by North Korea, something like that. As they claimed, launched by Iran against Poland, this kind of thing. There is no defense.
How fast does it go from Russia to, say, Florida or Texas if a nuke goes off? What does that look like?
Well, they're coming over the poles. I guess you have somewhere between, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that.
And they can't blow them up in the sky and stop them from coming to us?
No. The essentially anti-missile missile systems are a hoax. You cannot shoot. The only times that they've ever been able to shoot a bullet with a bullet is when they were pre-programmed for the exact point in the air that they were to meet. The only way to take out incoming ICBMs coming over the pole is to use what are commonly called neutron bombs. That is an enhanced radiation device. This means essentially it has a thinner shell so that more of the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb explosion goes out as radiation rather than heat. And then you set those off in space, hopefully near enough to an incoming volley of H-bombs that it would knock out all their avionics and electronics and make them null and void. We don't have those.
Who has those?
No one. And I mean, neutron bombs were developed for that purpose in the first place, but they were abandoned in the 1970s.
Oh, leave it to government. Golly, they left us in a state of apocalypse. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah,
we don't have neutron. Nobody has neutron bombs?
No, I don't believe so. See, the Russians said, it's the capitalist bomb. See, it's enhanced radiation so they can kill everyone in the city, but then keep the city, which is, I think, really not what they were for. They really were for trying to take out incoming H-bombs, but they just don't have them. So in other words, we have mutually assured destruction. We have, you better not nuke me or I will nuke you. We do not, our government does not have the ability to protect us from a nuclear attack. By, they claim, and I don't believe them, but they claim if the North Koreans shot a missile or two that they could take a crack at it and maybe intercept them. Fine. For sake of argument, that has nothing to do with a full-scale attack by Russia, who have, 1,500 deployed H-bombs right now. How
many nuke bombs do
America lay down and die, pal?
How many nuke bombs does America and Russia have between themselves?
We have between 6,000 and 7,000 each, and about 1,500 deployed. Under the New START Treaty is 1,500 deployed. And now, look, I hate this discussion in a way because I sound like an alarmist. As you said, Chicken Little, crying wolf. The thing is, though, it can't be the case that we don't talk about this because we're afraid that we will sound too afraid if we talk about it. Okay?
What about the EMPs? Could they do an EMP that would knock out the internet?
No, I am under the I've been educated by a real expert in thermonuclear weapons, Gordon Prather, that amounts to a hoax. That, as he puts it, if a nuclear bomb is close enough to you to turn out your lights, you don't need to be worried about your lights. You're losing your city. You're a dead man anyway. That the EMP effect there, I think, is very exaggerated. What you need to worry about in terms of H-bombs is one H-bomb can kill your whole city. Tampa Bay, a couple of megatons would be enough to wipe out all of Tampa Bay. All of it.
You mean Tampa Bay, not just Tampa the city?
I'm sorry?
Not just Tampa City proper, but the whole Bay Area, you're saying?
Yeah. A couple of megatons would do L.A. A couple of megatons would do Houston, would do Dallas.
Now,
Okay?
what would that feel like?
Well, it wouldn't feel like anything. You'd be dead before you felt a thing. I mean, depending on how close you are. But we're talking, look, my latest book is called Hotter Than the Sun. In fact, much hotter than the sun. I interviewed a scientist for the book about how, at the very core of the sun, I forgot what he said, 20,000 degrees Kelvin or something. And these bombs burn at 50 million degrees Kelvin. And they were worried when they invented these things, they were worried that they might ignite the entire atmosphere and destroy all life on Earth. And then they did it anyway. And luckily that didn't happen. But they were afraid that they were going to burn off the oceans, burn off the atmosphere, and that every last blade of grass on this planet would be dead. It'd be the giant asteroid between Venus and Mars.
Scott, we're going to have a commercial break in a few minutes, but can you stay on for the full hour or you got to go?
Yes, let me double check here, but I am, yes, sir, I am good till the top of the hour.
Because we're getting into something that is people don't talk about this on Talk News Radio. We need to talk about it. So nukes, that used to be probably what they talked about in the 80s in talk radio. Maybe not. I don't know. But we're going to have to talk about this more because nobody talks about this. And this is huge. We just had a hurricane utterly devastate Sanibel and Fort Myers and other areas, Lee County, utter devastation. And I hate to, go into a negative topic, but now's the time when we just, Tampa Bay just missed that we need to really think about what are we talking about when we have these feckless, idiotic, chicken hawk neocons and our own Republicans in this area mindlessly giving every aid and every dollar to continually escalate this conflict in Ukraine. We need to wake up to what they're actually saying. It's almost as if they're baiting massive radioactive hurricanes to just come on up to Tampa Bay any moment with their actions. Let's get into this when we return with Scott Horton. My Neighbor's Choice returns. We are live on FM and AM talking about what would happen with a nuclear, you can't say nuclear, you have to say nuclear or you will not be allowed to speak in media according to the officials that monitor discourse in this land. I'm just joking, but I'm joined by Scott Horton of The Scott Horton Show. This is not a laughing matter, it's a serious matter, but it's one that is trivialized every day. We heard Mr. Biden saying we are closer to nuclear apocalypse than a long time. And I'm like, well, what did you do to contribute to that, sir? A lot, wouldn't you say, Scott?
Absolutely. It's just amazing to hear him talk about it. Like, this is just a thing that's happening in passive voice, or it's certainly 100% all Putin's doing. As though he's not playing a role in it, as though his government doesn't announce their support and their level of support for the other side of this war daily, as though they haven't threatened repeatedly that the goal here is to weaken the Russian government to the point that it collapses. That Biden himself has said this man has to go. His Secretary of State and Defense have said that they're trying to weaken Russia enough to destroy the regime. And they made it clear by leaking this also to Niall Ferguson, the British imperialist writer who wrote in Bloomberg magazine back when the war started. All the fancy pants people from the White House at the parties he went to, National Security Council officials and everything, say they want this. They like this. They want to drag this war out. They want to replicate Afghanistan, bleed them to bankruptcy. Admiral Stavridis wrote the same thing, told the same thing to the New York Times in January. We want to replicate the Afghan war, the dirty war, against the Soviet Union. He even invoked Obama's war in Syria, the dirty war there that led directly to the rise of the caliphate. This is just 4 months after leaving Afghanistan, after 40 years of intervention there. And they invoke the first 10 years of it and go, yeah, it was great. We want to do that again. And there's a few years out of finally destroying the caliphate in Iraq War III. And he's saying, yeah, we want to do like we did in Syria. We want to do that in Ukraine. That's Admiral Stavridis, who was going to be Hillary Clinton's Secretary of Defense. Obviously, speaking for the Democratic Party consensus, the White House consensus as they're embarking on this policy. So again, they built the Cold War context in which this war is taking place. And for that matter, it's just true that the war's been going on for 8 years since Biden's coup, or 8.5, I should say, Biden's coup. He was the point man. He held the Ukraine brief, as they say, in the Obama government when he was the vice president, that led the coup of 2014, that led to the war in the East, when the people of the East, power factions there anyway, refused to recognize the new coup junta and occupied government buildings, and then were ruthlessly attacked. And the Russians did help them defend themselves by sending deniable special operations forces across and so forth. But they didn't invade until this year, after 7 years of this, after the Minsk 1 and 2 peace deals had just failed. And the Kiev government wouldn't implement it because the Americans were not encouraging them to implement it this whole time. And in fact, we're arming them up in order to encourage them to not find a way to get along and implement the peace deal and put an end to the fighting. Because they see it as a way to weaken Russia and, again, to separate them from Germany. So, the fact that it's senile old Biden in there, and the fact that, never mind how senile he is, how about just how demented he's always been?
Yeah, he's not. It's not about senility. That's the dumb thing talk radio says. It's more about this man has no conscience. He's been pillaging the people for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy who did this, and he can't admit it at all. Same thing for Sullivan. His national security advisor was in on the coup then. We know for a fact. Same thing for Victoria Nuland, who's running point on this policy. And these are the people who did this. So, of course, now their story is that it's all Putin's fault. And as they put it, like hypnosis, you have to say, unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack. Well, come on, we just said it happened in the middle of a war that was already going on. It was 8 years into a violent conflict. How could it be unprovoked, as simple as that? That's like saying Osama bin Laden hated you because you like the blue sky and going to church on Sunday morning. That's not what he said he was mad about, We have to be more grown up than this. And now let me bring up an old friend of mine, Pat Buchanan, who's written for us. We published his articles at antiwar.com for a long time. And, he's kind of an old guy now. I don't know if everyone in your audience is familiar with him, but they should be. He was a speechwriter for Richard Nixon and for Ronald Reagan. He's a staunch conservative, even a paleo conservative. And he absolutely was a Cold War hawk when it came to the commies in the Soviet Union and China. But when the Soviet Union fell apart 30 years ago, Pat Buchanan and a few of his friends said, all right, well, that's it. The only reason we ever built this world empire was to protect the globe from global communism. But now that that's over, now we can be, as he wrote his book, a republic, not an empire. And we have to eschew the temptations of power, because this is how republics die. They embrace empire, and then they die in murder-suicide. It's happened over and over through history. This is actually what Quigley meant by tragedy and hope. Over and over again, civilizations kill themselves through overextension. The hope is that we could be smarter than to make that same mistake. And not to conflate Pat with Carol Quigley there, but still. Anyway, so
yeah, I want to
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Pat says this. Again, this guy's a super patriot, okay? He's the ultimate American patriot and anti-communist, okay? And he says, listen up, everybody. We used to draw the line halfway across the Elbe, halfway across Germany at the Elbe River. And we told the Reds then, if you try to invade West Germany, France, threaten England, we'll go to nuclear war against you. That's the line. And in fact, during the Prague Spring, Ike Eisenhower did nothing. And during the uprising in Czechoslovakia, Lyndon Johnson did nothing. And during the Solidarity uprising in Poland, Ronald Reagan did nothing. Because they said, guess what? Sorry, you're too far on the east side of the line. As bad as we hate it, this is the Soviet sphere of influence, and we're not willing to risk war over the Czech Republic or Hungary or Poland. We're just not going to. Okay? But now what have we done? Now we have moved that line from the Elbe River 1,200 miles east to Russia's very border. And so, wait, is that Sarah? Is it, how many thousand? Yeah, it's 1,200 miles east, I think. Now I got to look it up. Anyway, we moved it farther, as Pat says. We moved the line east of what we used to call Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe used to be like Poland and Austria and maybe Slovenia or something. Now we're talking about on the far side of Ukraine, Ukraine's eastern border, the Baltic states, where they line up against Belarus and Russia. We even, as he wrote in 1999, he warned, if we incorporate the Baltic states into NATO, that leaves the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on the other side of NATO lines, behind NATO lines, on the border between, on the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea there, bordering Poland and Lithuania, on the far side of Belarus and landlocked completely away from Russia. And by NATO alliance members. And that this is just absolutely playing with fire. We should not be doing this. And if you've read Pat, and I have read him a ton over this last 20 years here, he's the kind of guy who is not in favor of open free trade with China. He thinks that that was a mistake, that it helped them get too rich, and now they're too powerful. And he just, man, he don't like that red flag. Now, we all know it's the right wing of the Communist Party that rules China now. Maoism and Marxism, thank God, are dead there. But it is an authoritarian police state, more of a fascist one than a commie one, but still. But just to say, Pat is very skeptical. He's more nationalist than capitalist when it comes to trade with China in terms of those Republican values. He's not sold on free trade and this kind of thing. He's more of an economic nationalist, very skeptical of China and Chinese power, very critical of some of their foreign policy moves in terms of islands, disputed islands between China and the Filipinos, the Japanese, etc. And yet he warns in the most sober and adult and reasonable terms that did we not have a deal with China struck by Richard Nixon 50 years ago that said we recognize the fact that Taiwan is part of China, that that Beijing is the official government of the whole country, not which they pretended for 30 years that Taipei was the legitimate government of the whole nation of China. It was just wasn't real. It was denial of reality. And Nixon said, we don't care that much about Taiwan. And frankly, it is part of China. This is no different than Hong Kong. Were we willing to have a nuclear war when Britain gave Hong Kong back to China? And now they're becoming more and more under Chinese rule. It's less and less two systems, one country. But that's just tough, isn't it? You want to have a war with China over Hong Kong? You want to have a war with China to force them out of Tibet? Well, if you're not willing to do that, then why would you have a war to keep them out of Taiwan?
Right.
We're not talking about Japan. We're not talking about keeping China from attacking our ally Japan or even Vietnam, Laos, or Cambodia. We're talking about a runaway province of China. And Pat Buchanan is saying, look, the deal that Nixon made kept the peace for 50 years. He said, look, we recognize that it's one China, but we would like to see them reunited peacefully someday. Yeah. And we're not saying what we'll do about it, because if we promise to defend Taiwan, that will give them the courage they need to declare independence, which is the thing that will most likely get them attacked and drag us into a war that we don't want to fight. So we have this cute little strategic ambiguity where we say to the Taiwanese, you pipe down and don't declare independence. At the same time, we're telling the Chinese, we really, really, really don't want to see you invade Taiwan.
Right.
Hear me? Right? And that has worked for 50 years. And now what do we have? We have idiot Joe Biden going, I will defend Taiwan with American sailors no matter what. Right? In other words, forget ambiguity. That's the fourth time he's done that. When W. Bush accidentally said that, he went, oh, sorry, I didn't mean that. And when Donald Trump accidentally took the Taiwanese president's phone call on his first day in office, he went, oops, sorry, faux pas, didn't mean to do that. I'm not trying to change the one China policy, not trying to change strategic ambiguity. That was just a new guy, rookie mistake here. Sorry. What does Biden do? Again, maybe not senile, definitely demented. Now 4 times he has vowed that we would defend Taiwan, which again doesn't change anything except the incentives for the Taiwanese to declare independence and the incentives for Beijing to kill them instead, which would be a conflict which Biden swears we would sail right into the middle of. And again, with the threat of nuclear war. Tell me honestly, man, what do you think would happen if the Chinese shot one of those supersonic sea-skimming missiles that the Israelis sold them the blueprints for that they got from us, our closest friends? And what do you think of what would happen if one of those missiles sank an American aircraft carrier in the Taiwan Strait and we lost 7,000 sailors to the bottom of the sea? Joe Biden would immediately threaten H-bomb war.
I want to go back to the reality of the nuclear bombs, what they actually mean, because again, I think the average person just thinks of it as this scary thing, but I want to see the specifics. I'm not that you're an expert on nuclear armaments, but you mentioned that we don't have the capability to stop it from hitting places like here in Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay would be high on the priority list, right?
That's right.
Because of the fact of the military, base here.
Central Command, yeah.
Yeah, Central Command. So what would that look like? So, we've heard reports that Belgorod, the submarine, has gone missing. So is that how they would attack, from like a submarine, or would they just fire something straight from Russia?
Oh, I don't know. As far as how that kind of thing, I mean, presumably the most obvious way it would start here would be out of desperation using battlefield nukes in Ukraine, and then America escalating, and then the escalation spiral, and nobody's willing to back down or say they're sorry or lift a sanction or do a thing, and then it just gets out of control from there. As far as, if they want to do a surprise attack on D.C., yeah, presumably a sub would make sense, something like that. They could fire their new hypersonic cruise missiles from battleships in, say, the mid-Atlantic, and they'd be in D.C. in 5 minutes. With these, they claim that they have achieved speeds of Mach 7, 9, and 10 and this kind of thing. So, I'm not really sure. But, what people need to understand, we have essentially what they call strategic nuclear weapons are all just blackmail weapons. They're for killing cities with. If you're fighting a war with them, you got to take out large tank concentrations or something, you would use a very low-yield nuke in battle there. But essentially, the lines, you would like to think that there are, 1,000,001 different war plans that they can use and implement that are very flexible, that maybe we could have one situation where we use 10 nukes and another situation where we use 100, but never a situation where it gets out of control. But that's not right, because what we're talking about is bombs that can kill whole cities at a time.
I thought they have bombs now that can blow up a whole country-sized space now. Is that right?
Well, not a bomb, but a missile. So the Russians have a new heavy missile that can go around the southern hemisphere, around the South Pole and southern hemisphere, where we have no even pretended defense. And then it has enough different multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles on it. And they say now independently maneuverable reentry vehicles, and along with enough decoys, that they have enough warheads on one missile to take out every major city in Texas, or if you like, France, about the same size. So for people familiar, that would then be El Paso, Amarillo, and Lubbock, Dallas, Fort Worth, Waco, Fort Hood, Austin, San Antonio, Galveston, Houston, Port Arthur, Corpus Christi, of course. We're talking about tens of millions of people dead from one missile. The entire state of Texas destroyed forever.
And we don't have the ability to stop that, you're saying?
There's no way in the world to stop that.
Folks, you got to understand this. I want to get this. This is where I want to stay at for the rest of this, is the reality of this, because you've got a bunch of dumb people who are fake conservatives who are members of your representation in the Congress and the Senate. You got horrible representation in the Senate in Florida. And these people are not taking this matter seriously because they are bought and paid for by people who do not have your best interest at heart, because this wouldn't have even been anywhere near having to be a conversation if it wasn't for the reckless, idiotic, anti-American foreign policy being executed by both parties, mostly with some little bit of dissent. But yeah. I was in Hiroshima. I visited there. And I was there at Ground Zero. This church is the only thing that was standing at the Ground Zero where the bomb blew up over. And it's not a pretty sight. You see the photos of humans, and I don't want to be, graphic if you're eating your dinner, getting off work, but I mean the skin melting like wax off of them as they're walking around. Children born with massive deformities for many, many years afterwards. This is a horrific thing. Of course, America's a nation that really honors Christians, it says in its past, but it targeted Christian-heavy sectors, cities. It was sad how they did that in Japan to declare how great they would be, a great opposition to the godless Soviet Union. But nevertheless, I want to go to this.
Let me butt in here on Hiroshima before you get too far off of that, because two things there. First of all, a guy emailed me years ago, sent me pictures that his grandfather took, and I had to promise never to publish them because they're not copywritten or anything like this. But they are extremely high quality panorama views that his grandfather took of Hiroshima, of just the absolute devastation. It is unbelievable. But here's the joke. That was just a 10 kiloton bomb.
Right.
The Nagasaki bomb was 15 kilotons. It was a mountainous region, and it kind of went off course and this and that. So a bit fewer people were killed. There's still 75,000 people killed instantly, and I don't mean to play it down, but that was. So here's my point, though. That Nagasaki bomb, that's the blasting cap for setting off a thermonuclear weapon, a hydrogen bomb. As you remember on Back to the Future, he's got Mr. Fusion on the back of the DeLorean, is Back to the Future 2, where it's cold fusion. That's the joke. Cold fusion means free energy, right? If you can combine atoms together and get a release of energy at room temperature, then free energy for all humanity forever. It's the ultimate puzzle to solve. Right now, the only way to achieve fusion, you have to make it hotter than the sun. And the way you make it hotter than the sun is first you split uranium or plutonium atoms. And that is your fission bomb. That's your Nagasaki bomb, the blasting cap. Now it's hot enough that you can fuse hydrogen isotopes together. And when you fuse these, that's, again, the first is splitting heavy metal atoms. Now you're making it hot enough to fuse these lightest atoms, these hydrogen isotopes, and by fusing them together, you release into the megatons of energy.
Is that a product on the market now, or is that a product on the market now, or theoretical?
1,000 or 10,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
And is that on the market now for governments, or that's not there?
Okay. Yes. Everyone go to YouTube and just type in thermonuclear test. Arizona. If you're looking at stuff going off in Nevada and Arizona, those are just little A-bombs.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the Pacific Ocean, those are the H-bomb tests. And you will see that when you're talking just 1 or 2 or 3 megatons, never mind 10 or 20. But when you're just talking 1, 2, 3 megatons, that's enough to kill Dallas, Texas, dude.
How come those bombs didn't create nuclear winter for everybody when they were dropping them in the ocean?
Because they were dropping them in the ocean, right?
Like
nuclear
deep,
winter.
They sent them deep in the water, or like where? I don't know anything about it.
No, I mean, mostly they were doing it over a small, previously inhabited islands, but essentially just nuking sand and palm trees. Nuclear winter comes, and thank you for bringing this up. There's so many great points for me to make here. The first thing I want to say about this is if you're picturing blizzards in July and you think that that's crazy, you're right. Don't forget that. That's not the argument, okay? We're not talking about blizzards in July. Nuclear winter means that the weather, the temperature drops by 3, 4, 5 degrees and all the crops fail and we all starve to death. It means not that there's blizzards in July, but it means there's no sun in July. And it's overcast.
I mean no sun. It's going to be cloudy all day?
That's right. And it's to the degree that the crops will not grow. And so
even in Florida?
Here's how it happens. Even in a limited nuclear war between just India and Pakistan, it's all the simulations now say that the soot from the burning cities and the forest fires raging out of control, just in a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, if China and America and everyone else stays out, that would be enough to cause crop failure and the death of billions. Because what happens is the soot and the smoke is so much and it goes up above the clouds where it can't be rained out, up into the stratosphere. So you have global cooling by, again, a few degrees, enough to wipe out the crops. And as you understand, my friend, the only reason there's 7.5 billion people alive in the world today is because of advanced market capitalism that delivers food to people's tables. Without that, with a nuclear war, first of all, the crop failures, but secondly, the absolute breakdown in trade and goods and services and food distribution among the people, you are literally talking about billions of people dying. You're talking about, as Joe Biden, our president, put it last night, Armageddon.
This is serious stuff, folks. We need to take this seriously. Do not vote for any representative, Republican or Democrat or senator, who is not adamantly opposed to continuing the war in Ukraine on our side. Every person who represents you should be demanding immediate peace and using America's influence to bring a diplomatic resolution to this matter as soon as possible, and for the other, Taiwan as well. But that is not what we see today, so do not support them at all. I appreciate your time, Scott. It's sobering analysis of a reality that is all too close to home, and yet people are focused on the dumbest things to amuse themselves to death rather than wake up. So I'm glad we did this, and we need to do more of this. I mean, we could talk for hours about the reality of nuclear war until this really starts to sink in for folks to spread the word of mouth about what's going on. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
And check out the Scott Horton Show as well as antiwar.com for more of this type of analysis. The Scott Horton Show is available online, on demand as a podcast. And it's also antiwar.com is the place to go to understand the true America First perspective, and even better than that, human first. Okay? Because at the end of the day, I'm not here to worship man's idols. I'm here to respect my neighbor and love him as myself. That's better than any nation. And that is what will inherit the earth. So that's it for A Neighbor's Choice, folks. In the meantime, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. God desires mercy, not sacrifice. So let's live that out. Let's use sobriety. Let's not look to government to get our masculinity. Let's be true adults and bring peace. Godspeed.